So good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes or just a few seconds. I want to welcome you. Just another 30 seconds or so to let people get in. Oh, gosh. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Harvard Graduate School of Education Leadership Speaker Series. My name is Deborah Jewell-Sherman, and it's my honor and privilege every day to be a faculty member here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. This series was developed in response to the unprecedented challenge that the education sector is facing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We are all aware that the current events are having a profound impact on education. Over the course of this series, we will be joined by guests whose leadership, expertise, and vision are uniquely positioned to drive the sector forward. For today's event, I am delighted that we are joined by Dr. Darienne Driver Hudson, President and CEO of United Way for Southeastern Michigan, which is located in Detroit. Dr. Hudson is a dynamic nonprofit executive and lifelong educator who believes strongly in the power of collective impact and in the importance of public-private partnerships to solve societal issues. She is purposefully and intentionally leading United Way for Southeastern Michigan, a 100-plus-year-old organization, in a direction that places an emphasis on listening to the community and addressing its greatest needs. Before joining United Way, Dr. Hudson was superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools, the largest district in Wisconsin. Prior to being named superintendent, Dr. Hudson was MPS's first chief innovation officer. In that role, she successfully narrowed the achievement gap in MPS's commitment schools, which are the schools with the greatest need for improvement. Throughout her career, Dr. Hudson has initiated a series of bold reforms designed to ensure equity for all. And as a point of personal pride, she notes that she began her career as an elementary school teacher in the Detroit Public Schools. Dr. Hudson serves on the steering committee for Launch Michigan, the Wayne County After School Partnership, and is on the Mayor's Workforce Investment Board. She serves on the board of Detroit's Children's Fund and is a trustee for Educational Testing Services. Most recently, Dr. Hudson joined the board of directors at the Detroit Public Schools Foundation. She also was named a 219 Detroit Business Powered by Women honoree. Dr. Hudson's ties with Harvard run deep. She is a proud alum of the Ed Schools and the Urban Superintendent's Program, during which time I proudly say that she was my doctoral advisee. In 2017, Dr. Hudson was elected to the Board of Overseers for Harvard University. I am so grateful that Dr. Hudson is joining us today. I will invite her to say a few words before turning to our discussion. We will be incorporating some of the questions you submitted when you registered for today's event. You can also submit questions throughout our discussion in the webinar's question and answer feature. We will include as many of your questions as possible. And with that, I would love to turn things over to Dr. Darienne Hudson.
Thank you so much, Deborah, or as they call you, DJS, for this incredible opportunity. I feel so honored to be here with all of you today, and it's especially a delight to be able to talk to you as a former advisee and mentee, and just really as colleagues. I think you're such a gift to our university. Thinking about how I wanted to start this conversation today, I can't escape what our reality is right now, this exhausting reality that we're all living in. And the privilege that I have of serving as president of United Way for Southeastern Michigan, but also the burden that comes with leadership, particularly when you are in a position to lead with courage, to lead for equity, to talk about those really difficult challenges that many people want to shy away from, and ultimately galvanizing a community to get results for those who are underserved. And so what's happening on the ground here in Detroit, I'm sure many of you are aware that Michigan has the third highest number of cases, also the third highest number of deaths that are happening in our country. And we're past 3,600 now in terms of the number of people who have died. And that's more than the number of people who died in 9/11. And we have over 40,000 cases. And 80% of what I have just described to you is happening in Southeastern Michigan. It's happening in the Detroit metro area. And so very shortly after our governor made an executive order to basically shut down all services as we know them, the United Way had to position ourselves very quickly with the corporate partners, the philanthropic community, to lead the response for this crisis for COVID-19 in the Metro Detroit area among our nonprofits. I will say that this has been a test unlike any we've ever seen. And what it has really brought me back to is that, when you're leading in time of crisis, of disaster, that you have to get back in touch with your core values. They really define who you are, whose you are, and what you stand for. And I wanted to just take a minute because I've lived in a lot of places. If anyone reads my bio, they will see it's just, a lot of different states that have really added up to being where I am today. But it all started with my parents, who are both healthcare professionals, retired now. My grandmothers, one was an educator, one was an entrepreneur and had her own cosmetology business. My sister's a doctor and my brother's a minister. And so when you talk about service before self, when you talk about leadership at any age, when you talk about education being a foundation, these were the values that were instilled in me at a very young age. And my parents were children of the civil rights movement. And so anytime that I would say I didn't feel like going to school, why did I, go to school? I don't want to do my homework. I got the full history of why it was important. And, those who were tortured and beaten and who died so that I could go to school anywhere I wanted to go. And those values stay with you. When you start to think about who has access and who doesn't. And every role that I've had, whether it was leading turnaround schools, helping with strategic planning and management, working in the innovation space, leading a district as a superintendent, and now in this role, it really comes down to having a strong faith, being able to articulate what equity looks like and feels like, and being able to bring people to you in those conversations. And it's not easy, but it is definitely the testament of what it means to be a leader, and particularly one with an educational background at this current time. And so sometimes we read bios, they sound fancy, it sounds easy, even glamorous perhaps, but at the end of the day, children have always been at my heart, and I may not have any of my own, but people will ask me, well, how many children do you have? Depending on which district I was in, so we'll have 80,000. And when I was in Philly, I said, I have 167,000, and and so on. And so that's really what my life's work has been about. And but now I'm in the nonprofit space, but I'm an educator at heart. And just during these times, I just want to encourage everyone to not be afraid to lead, to really step into the space that you were built for, that your organizations were built for, and bring people with you to really start to figure out how we're going to come out of this pandemic better and stronger. So I know we have a rich conversation ahead of us, and I could go on, but that's really truly what's top of mind for me, and where I would love to just be able to dig in and have a conversation with you, Deborah. I'm a DJS.
I answer to both.
Okay.
That was wonderful, Darienne. Thank you. Tell us how you arrived at the current role that you now occupy. You
Sure.
sort of intimated the journey, but
Mhm. So when I was superintendent in Milwaukee, I was very active with the United Way. I chaired the volunteer engagement committee and was literally a billboard for United Way. So my maiden name was Driver. And so you would see me, I would say, drive change, volunteer, give to United Way. And so my husband, who was my fiance at the time, used to always say, you love United Way so much, why don't you see if they have a job? And once I finally decided to do it, there were two options, Cincinnati and Detroit. And my husband's from Detroit. And so I just sort of took a leap of faith and applied for that position to land here with the United Way for Southeastern Michigan. And I will say that's the personal side. The professional side really was, being in education for so many years and all of these resources, these new strategies and best practices, and we still were just barely moving the needle for our children, and realizing that we typically are talking about education in one silo and
mhm,
wraparound services, social emotional supports in another, and
mhm,
recognizing we need to bring those two worlds together if we're going to be able to make a difference. And so now being in this position, it gives me the opportunity. Yes, I understand schools, I understand what's happening in our districts. So in every conversation, I'm able to say, we've got to talk about children and what's happening to their families, making
mhm.
sure they have a roof over their heads, making sure they have food on the table, that they have a job, that they have access to technology and transportation, if we're really going to be able to see the results we want to see.
Mhm. Sounds like you are the person for the job and that this was in many ways ready made for you. They were waiting for you. You've had some other experiences that we've talked about in previous conversations that also have made you singularly ready for this job. Would you talk to us about some of the lessons from the field that you learned when you were leading during other disasters?
Sure. And the chuckling that you all are seeing is that we're talking about those disasters that are natural and man-made. So it's been a little bit of both. But what's really started this all in me thinking about how race and economics and education really create this collision course in terms of how we are experiencing education and our ability to be able to affect change on behalf of our children. When I was a teacher, my first month in was 9/11. And Detroit has the largest population of Arab Americans in the country. And so having to explain to 9-year-olds what is happening in their worlds around them, how we address issues of bigotry and hate, how we understand what has happened in terms of sort of the economic impact that came as a result of that, was something I wasn't quite prepared for, but I had to learn really quickly. And I would say transparency and authenticity are so critical in times such as these, because one, children can always see through you. And it was the biggest lesson that I've carried with me, because I'm always thinking, not that you're talking to children, but that you just keep it in mind that, people can pick up if you're not showing up in an authentic way. And
Yes.
so to fast forward and thinking about when I was at Harvard in my first semester in USP was Hurricane Katrina. And my parents live in Jackson, Mississippi. And so a tree had fallen on our house. And I remember, didn't have power for a week. My mother was working at Mississippi Blood Services, and she was literally working 24/7, trying to, handle the blood donations. And I also remember what happened with their insurance company afterwards and how difficult it was to get that roof repaired, and how they were treated, and trying to get that roof repaired as an older Black couple. And again, it reminds you, with all of these different decisions that are things that are happening to us, how do we talk about race? How do we talk about economics and education? And at Harvard, it was this conversation around New Orleans. What are we going to do? This district has been wiped off the map. And I remember so many of my colleagues were packing up to go down to New Orleans to try to help make a difference. But what was happening in the classroom was that we were forced to talk about race and education, and they were very difficult conversations. And so each one of these experiences, they keep shaping you and building you to the next journey. And you know, I literally every phase of my life, there's an example of having some type of a backdrop, whether it was going to Philadelphia in 2008 when we had this huge economic recession, but we also had our first Black president. And so the hope that was existing in the midst of such chaos and devastation is something I would say is another important lesson, that in all the things that are happening, we can't lose sight of what's possible and what the opportunities are with those disasters. I would say the last ones that kind of go together, when I came to Milwaukee, and in 2012, this was when Trayvon Martin was murdered, when I became the Chief Innovation Officer. 2014, when I became superintendent, Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson. Halfway through my superintendency, we had a local shooting that really made national attention and was referred to as Milwaukee is on fire. And so trying to bring communities together to understand the realities that African Americans are experiencing, that white Americans are experiencing, that those of us in public service are experiencing, has been one of the greatest challenges I've ever had. But our ability to move forward, to bring together people who have never shared the same belief systems, who are coming from different sectors, to really bring them together around these core issues, I would say has been a really important lesson. And what I will also say is, can we please come out of this not just learning from disaster, but how do we start to really think about how we are prepared for the next one, and what does preparedness look like? And so, you know, I think about those lessons, and it's crazy when you think about all those different years and the things that have happened along the way. And all I keep being reminded of during this COVID pandemic is, gosh, we've missed the mark in a lot of ways, and our systems just were not prepared. No one could even imagine this.
No.
But how do we start to do a little bit more, you know, scenario building around this, instead of waiting for a Parkland to happen, waiting for, you know, Charlottesville to happen. And so I would definitely say that one of those key lessons is just really thinking about preparedness, and not just for theory, but really how do we bring resources and people together so that they don't happen again.
Thank you, Darienne. This pandemic has highlighted the divide in opinions, in beliefs, in opportunities. Certainly, certain segments of our community have been harder hit than others. And we've seen the effects of the pandemic fan out in different ways in different communities. How are you and the United Way and all of the partners with whom you are working addressing that great divide?
So in a few ways, our United Way has actually, in partnership with now about 50 different organizations, we launched the COVID-19 Community Response Fund. We've raised now over $15 million. About $2 million of that is in-kind support to really address the needs that we're seeing in our community. It's everything from providing PPE. We've donated now tens of thousands of pieces of equipment to 300 different sites. We've awarded over 300 sites with dollars to help really meet the needs around food distribution and delivery, to help with our shelters, those who are precariously housed, but also those who are experiencing homelessness, our childcare providers who are now frontline, and, you know, essential workers who are helping the frontline employees who have to work and need a place for their children. But we've also, I want to talk a little bit about what's happened in the education space, because when we launched this fund, the dollars were set aside for wraparound services. You know, I'm a huge advocate for community schools, for bringing the social emotional learning supports together with the academic supports. And that lasted maybe for about a week. And then it all shifted to remote learning needs, you know, access to technology, from tablets to hotspots. We've now funded over $600,000 to go towards all of the districts in our region. We serve 81 school districts with our United Way. Detroit Public Schools Community District, who's led by Nikolai Vitti, who is a member of the cohort that I was a part of, Sweet 16, is the superintendent for DPSCD, and they are leading an effort called Connected Futures, it's $30 million over the next 4 years, where we'll be putting tablets in the hands of every child. In DPSCD, they have over 50,000 children, and they will also have free internet access. And so it's forced a very, very different type of action, relentless focus, unapologetic about really talking about these harsh issues. Detroit's 80% Black. And so we cannot talk about this pandemic without talking about the disparities that are existing for the African American community. And to hear it out of organizations, leaders who typically don't speak on these types of issues, I think has been eye-opening. It's been necessary. And again, we have to make sure we come out of this better. We can't talk about it now and then just focus on recovery and then everything's exactly how it was. We really need to be thinking much more broadly about, what does resilience really mean and look like? How do we rebuild for the better? And so there's no shortage of activity or goodwill or collaboration. But I think what's going to be really mission critical for all of us, DJS, is that we really think about how we move forward in a different way.
Yeah, talking about scenario planning, many of us are very mindful that schools may or may not open in September, but even if they do open in September, for some students, there would have been 9 months without instruction. How are you thinking about helping educators and students address and ameliorate the learning gap that has taken place in communities across this country?
Sure. So I think first, just as I was listening to your question, our region is very interesting because we have a combination of urban, suburban, and rural. One of the counties that I represent or that I serve is the 5th wealthiest county in the country, Oakland County. And so what was interesting when the executive order came, basically saying we had to close schools and shut down, all businesses, there were a handful of districts, they were closed before the announcement came out. Every child had a tablet. They had full access. And what often happens as educators, we tend to sneer at those districts or be jealous of those districts, but we need to learn from them.
Exactly.
We need to get their playbook and figure out exactly how did they prepare for this? How did they know ahead of time that we needed to have these different resources? And so I definitely think that's the first step. All of those districts that were able to ramp up quickly, what do we need to do to learn from them? When we think about closing the digital divide, it can't just be this district solves this issue, then this one over here, because our children are mobile. They are moving, around our region. And so, how do we think about making sure all of them are equipped, no matter what district that they're in? These have to be statewide conversations, regional conversations that we're having. I've been thinking a lot about grade bands and how, at this point, it's been almost 9 months. And so, even if school doors opened on September 1st, how are our children really going to be ready? And, do we need to think take some of the best practices from Montessori, where they have grade bands? They have children, grades 3 through 5 together, 6 through 8 are together, and thinking about how we approach our curriculum standards very differently. How do we think about these methodologies? We need to be getting the best of every type of teaching strategy, methodology that there is to bring into the hands of our children and families. I also think it's important that we don't leave our families behind. So it's interesting being a CEO right now, and everybody knows I was a teacher. And so I have a number of staff members who will call and they'll kind of share what's happening. And then they'll say, well, what do you think I should do? Or, do you have any recommendations? How can I keep my child busy? Or, how do I handle these different lessons? I'm so confused. I feel overwhelmed. And so everything we're talking about for the children, we have to remember their families. I think we have to break that cycle of just thinking, teachers, educators, we only focus on our children, and that the parents, they're responsible after we hand them off. We really need to be thinking about how all of us adopt those best practices moving forward, because you know this already. There's a good chance that the children are going to be home when it's time to open traditional school.
Correct. Yeah. You're speaking about teachers reminds me that there has been a heightened appreciation of teachers, educators, administrators, and staff as parents are home with their children and taking on a role that they really never envisioned that they would. How are you in your current role thinking about leveraging this goodwill, this appreciation of teachers, and this renewed respect for teachers? In fact, this is the kind of respect people had for teachers when I was a child. It's why I wanted to be one. So how are you thinking about galvanizing that goodwill that's nationwide and ensuring that it continues long after the pandemic?
Mm-hmm. So I'm fortunate that I sit on Launch Michigan, as you mentioned earlier, which is actually a cross-sector effort with the business community, with educators, with the philanthropics and community-based organizations. It's statewide, and we're talking about a number of issues that are affecting our young people, including literacy development, including wraparound services and, financial supports, things of that nature. I think we need to be honest about how much we pay our teachers and really thinking about how we are going to make these positions attractive, how we're going to keep people in these positions. I ended up being a statistic. I taught for 4 years. I was laid off twice during that time. Wow. And I had 4 jobs. I mean, just all of those different things that we talk about. And we have to be willing to make the investment. You talk about billions of dollars for the small businesses and, for the nonprofits and those things, but where's the $1 billion that's going to go into education for teachers, for social workers, for counselors? And we have to use it, like you said, the role that I'm in as a loud advocate, because now I can say what I want. No one can say, I don't have to be as cautious. And I can really be an advocate for my colleagues who are leading these districts, for my teachers who are in the classrooms. Mm-hmm. I also think we have to go beyond the parent-teacher conference as the only time that we, really talk about our children learning. We got to give our teachers support year-round. We need to. I know so many of them who use Remind, who are texting, who are calling, who are, using all these different tools to communicate with their children before the pandemic. And we have to make sure those types of conversations become the norm. And we need to figure out how we build it into the school day. And I believe we have enough opportunity to do that, especially as we reimagine what schools look like. Because I feel that the ones who have been the most successful during this time are the ones who are like, I talk to my teacher every day at 6:30. She's made, 10-minute time slots for all of her children, or his children, so they can talk. That's how we have to come out of this. So we have to be loud. We can't apologize for it. And all of the advocacy organizations, you and I have been a part of many of them over the years. I think really bringing them together around that parent, teacher, student connection, the content that's being taught. Elmer used to talk all the time about the instructional core. It's still relevant today, and how we're going to provide more support for it. So I know I'm very passionate about it, but we have to act.
No, that's why you are in the role that you are in. That passion is palpable and needed. The pandemic is causing significant budgetary shortfalls. And I know in my community that has led to a diminution of after-school activities and summer programs. Are you seeing that in your community? And even if you're not, how do you think we need to come together to provide other supports for our young people as the summer months approach?
So we are seeing that here, whether it's cuts at the state and local levels. We're also seeing quite a bit of the strain and the tension between the digital and the physical. Recognizing that, our young people and even adults, need to be able to move. They need to be able to be engaged in activities that stimulate their minds as well as their bodies. And so there seems to be some movement on having the parks be open because you can control social distancing a little bit better in that way. But a number of our recreation centers will probably be closed. And so there's a table that is forming, again, cross-sector with our educators, our government, our businesses, and the philanthropic community to really talk about how can we provide the same type of summer experience for our young people, knowing that a number of our institutions are going to have to be closed. The other large topic is around food distribution distribution and delivery. We run a program called Meet Up and Eat Up, where we've delivered we've delivered summer meals at over 700 sites annually for the city of Detroit. And so, that harsh reality that we may not have all 700 sites open, how are we going to make sure that our children eat?
It's so true. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to ask just one more question, and then we'll be taking questions from the participants in the webinar. So please send your questions, put your questions in the chat box, and we'll get to them in just a minute. Darienne, with all that is horrific about the pandemic, it has forced us to use technology differently,
Yes.
to think about teaching and learning differently, and you've touched on some of that. I know that that's part of your scenario planning and your thinking. Would you share with us how some of the things that we should take from our current experience, not that we planned for it, not that we wanted it, but some of the ways in which we've changed? How can we capitalize on those things going forward so that our teaching and learning is better and stronger and our community collaborations are more meaningful?
Well, you brought up technology. I mean, that is the big one. It is, after all, the 21st century. And so how do we really use our technology to our advantage? We're probably one of the only countries, again, that says, oh, I don't know how to use technology. The same way it was like, oh, I don't know, I don't understand math. That's ridiculous. We have all of these tools. We have access. We've got to think about how we really leverage and build an infrastructure that supports technology, the use of it, and really providing access for all. This conversation around the digital divide and how we need to change our instructional practices. I don't want us to lose that momentum that we have, and talking about, those vulnerable populations, those, rural populations in our urban centers that really need this support. I'd like to see us come out of that. I think about partnership differently too, and access. And I say that because, sometimes as CEOs and professors or, presidents, we tend to think, positionality dictates who you meet with, when you meet with them, how often or how frequently and how much time. And all of that has gone out of the window. I have more CEOs' phone numbers, more people have mine than I have had in a really long time. And so, that's the way that it should be. And we need to move forward, not focused on the positionality, but really, how we can really bring our resources together in partnership to get things done that's going to really change what's happening in our community. And the last thing I would say, which isn't connected necessarily to our conversation, but just care for the elderly. This has really brought a lot of attention to what happens in nursing homes. My father used to run a nursing home. And so, that's something I've been familiar with for a long time, but how we care for them, they've been isolated. We actually have a volunteer program called the Friendly Caller now, so people can call our isolated seniors. But we need to move forward with a more supportive and objective view about our elderly than the way that we have in the past.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, the first question is a complement to what you just said, and that is, in addition to those steps to take to support our elderly who are vulnerable, this person is asking, how do we talk to children about their experiences and how they are coping? I have not heard a lot of people talking about supporting students in making meaning of COVID-19.
Well, I honestly think there's a few different ways. So there are hotlines that have been set up to help our young people. I believe that provides an anonymous way to hear from our young folks. We need to be able to really use the data and what we're hearing from them to make different decisions. In my organization alone, most of my employees are parents. And so, we have, I don't want to say focus groups like children are, widgets, but we have the focus groups in our organizations, and, to be able to talk to them, I think is really critical. One of the things that we had to implement I called it recess, but it was just giving my staff 20, 30 minutes a day just to go play with their kids, because you'd have these calls and all you could hear was, oh, honey, not right now, or give me 5 minutes, or I'll be right with you. And, our children are feeling neglected, even in the most secure environments. And so, most of us have some type of a youth council and advisory council. We need to draw from them I will tell the person who asked this question, some of the most powerful lessons I learned when we went through the riots in Milwaukee. I brought my student advisory group together, and they gave me so much feedback about how we got to this place, what needs to happen as a result of it. And they really helped design the equity strategy that we had coming out of that called MPS Cares. And so we have to be intentional. And you're right, we haven't done a good enough job about talking to our young people right now, besides granting them graduation, promoting them to the next grade. But there's a lot of concern and fear out there. So I appreciate the push. You've motivated me now to make sure that we're talking to our young people and see how they feel about this. Thank you.
Which is wonderful. Our next question has to do with issues that the pandemic has brought to the fore. And we talked a little bit about this, but the health inequities for African Americans, for Latinx, for AAPI, for Native Americans, for people in impoverished situations. How can educational institutions become active participants in addressing the health issues our students and families are going through?
I think a big part of it, and this may oversimplify the issue, is we have to tell our stories and our experiences. I have 5 cousins who have had the coronavirus. One of my staff members was turned around from the hospital the first time that she went. And the second time, they ended up calling the ambulance. And that's how they were able to get to the hospital and get admitted and get her the care that she had,
Mm.
that she needed. She had pneumonia, and they turned her around with no medicine the first time. And so we can't listen to those and think that they're one-offs. And, I know there's privacy issues. We all have to pay attention to FERPA and HIPAA and things like that, but we have to tell these stories and then figure out how we bring them together to build a real platform that's going to
Mhm.
talk about these issues. Because oftentimes what I've learned, we assume that, well, if you just talk to the person in charge, then they're going to be able to fix it. But we need to talk to the nurses. We need to talk to a lot of the folks who are living this day by day.
Oh my
and,
gosh,
and
yeah.
yeah, and so the same way we talk about our, all of our, Strive networks and collective impact networks for education, we have to have that same design and intentionality to be able to do this. But I really think it starts with telling our stories and then doing something about it. Call your legislator, call your, neighborhood association, there are dozens of ways that you can start to build a coalition around closing these gaps and addressing inequities that are hitting home.
Mhm. Thank you. Another question has to do with your thoughts about preserving and furthering the development of community schools in virtual reality.
Yeah.
That is occurring and more people are thinking about it. What are your thoughts?
I'm a huge poster child for community schools. Pre-pandemic, that was one of the strongest partnerships that we had with United Way and the teachers union and the district when I was superintendent. And so, in my opinion, you really can't talk about academic supports and learning if you're not going to talk about those wraparound supports and the whole child development. I think during this time, what's been interesting, and it's been a lesson for United Way as well, as we started funding, you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and, we were addressing those basic needs first. And it was the thought, well, we need to make sure they eat before we're concerned about whether or not they're reading or learning. And very quickly realized, like, no, this has to be the priority. How our children are learning, the environments in which they learn, it all has to be part of one conversation. So
Mhm.
I do think that there's a possibility for it to happen virtually. We have lessons from colleagues around our region, from the Boys and Girls Club, from Big Brothers, Big Sisters, from communities and schools, some of our shelters who have figured out telehealth. So that's one. That could be a really big place to lean in. But two, just even how we do these Zoom calls, you can bring students together, to have focus groups to talk about the supports they need. You can have these conversations with their parents who are looking for jobs, who are trying to take ESL classes or trying to get their GEDs. There are we're using this for our meetings, but we have to use the same strategies that are working for us to help our community, to help our children. So I think the future is promising for the community schools, and just definitely looking forward to expanding it in our region for sure.
Good. What are some of the challenges with supporting the community and communicating with other entities so that there is not problem overlapping? That is overlapping, producing certain supports and maybe doing a great deal in some communities and other communities being left out. That is duplicative services, I think is what the questioner is trying to get at. How do we ensure, or how are you ensuring that you're hitting all of your communities and not oversaturating some and minimizing the response in others?
Okay. So our flagship program, which has really been an anchor for how we've approached this work, is 211. This is an information and referral service, the same way you would call 911 if there's a fire or an emergency. You call 211 if you need help in the social services space. And so it actually gives us data. We serve 6 counties, not just 3, with this data from 211. And it actually gives you an assessment of the number of calls, what are the areas of greatest need, and how can we approach it together. And so we use that data. I talked earlier about the funders group who came together to raise money. We actually use that data to help us make investment decisions. So if we see that we're getting more calls about food, about electricity, about restarting water from one portion of our region, but then another portion is focused more on shelters, we are actually using that to help with determining where we need to make the greatest amount of investment. I will also say this has required an unprecedented amount of collaboration. And so we also have weekly calls with the largest frontline agencies who are providing the bulk of or at least they're the umbrella organizations for all of these services. And we're just sharing strategies and resources. And what's starting to happen, if I know I'm funding a food distribution program, and the Balmer Group is funding one as well, we're figuring out how to bring our resources together. And in the same vein, that's happening with the nonprofit agencies. Okay, I'll set up Forgotten Harvest. I'm going to set up my 15 distribution sites here. Gleaners is going to set up their sites here. And we've been able to cover the whole region as opposed to people just trying to, duplicate services. So what's been most impressive and what I'm very, very inspired by is that, no one is caring about credit right now. People are really trying to figure out how they pull those resources together, how they align them to make sure that we're getting as much help out into the community as possible. But it starts with data. It really does. And, all these conversations that we have about equity, it always, you have to start with the data and what it's telling you and how you address those gaps.
Data and communication.
Yes, and collaboration and focus.
And collaboration.
Yep.
Speaking of partnerships and working together, how would you advise state-level policymakers about funding public health and educational programs at complementary ways? The funding streams are often at variance, and that's sometimes why different people are jockeying for position. Because the loudest nail, the squeaky wheel gets the most funding. How can state policymakers be thinking about this work going forward so that they're incentivizing the collaboration that you're demonstrating?
A very powerful lesson that I learned in Wisconsin was when the urban districts and the rural districts started joining forces together, and we were lobbying for funding for technology, for transportation, for teacher recruitment and retention, because even though the issues manifested themselves differently in our districts, they at their heart were the same. And they were very costly to our operation and our ability to serve children. And so one of the traps I'm concerned that we've fallen into during this pandemic is that we are still thinking of, well, we're going to advocate about these core issues, and we're talking mainly to Democrats because that's who's represents our area, and we haven't really thought about how we need to be lobbying across institutions and talking to multiple representatives from different sides of the aisle and from different points of view. And so we all have our slates. Everyone's, pulling on the governor, pulling on our state representatives to try to talk about these pressing issues. But I do think more opportunities for some collective lobbying, collective advocacy are really necessary if we're going to work through this. And again, I have some real-time examples that I can draw from to be able to show that. So that's actually a push. We had a conversation with a congresswoman yesterday, and she was like, look, I support you. I believe in everything you do. Can you go talk to somebody who disagrees with you? And, you know, and she was right. And, you know, we're like, look, we got to try harder. We need to get our colleagues from different parts of the state, you know, to say, hey, as United Ways, you know, let us all advocate for these things. Instead of it trying to just be this organization here and that organization there. The one piece I do want to make sure I clarify, we are fortunate to have a governor who's been very intentional with talking to multiple pockets. And she's been very transparent about budget challenges, but she's having these group meetings. They're like every 15 minutes, every day, talking to all of the different sectors. She's brought a lot of people together to try to think about how we reopen, how we recover. Again, different points of view, different life experiences, but to help us land on a solution that's going to benefit all. So I want to make sure I lift that, because it's just been amazing how many calls. And again, we're benefiting from Zoom and Teams and all these other things to help us with great efficiency and speed be able to have these important conversations.
Wonderful. You mentioned earlier that there were systems that have done a much better job preparing, and they were able to take action and set course earlier. Can you share some specific examples? And is anybody codifying these best practices so that we have a playbook going forward? I think often in the midst of a crisis, we're so busy doing that nobody is actually taking note of the lessons learned. Wondered what you're doing.
So I guess maybe broadly what I would say is, you know, especially as our urban districts, we have to really leverage our E-rate dollars that we get every year. I came behind Greg Thornton, who had a mind for technology. He was a futurist almost in the way he thought about making sure that schools were well wired and equipped. And so I really learned from him in terms of how I, you know, approached it, and even thinking now about where I am here. We designed 211. So 211 is a call center at the end of the day. It is now fully remote. When we were in this place last year, we were not fully remote, and we had an investment from one of our local partners, Roush. They invested a significant amount of dollars to help us get to the place where we could be fully operational remotely. And, you know, a few months later, we really needed to have that service. And so I say all that to say, I think the districts that have been the best positioned are those that are really, they've already been thinking ahead about, you know, what would it look like if we were fully digital, if our operations had to be digital for our young people to be one-to-one. And we know that it's not easy for everyone. You know, I'm in a city where they were under emergency management for 15 years. So they're just getting to that place. And that's why the Connected Future strategy is so important, because now you have, you know, business, corporate, philanthropic, all coming together to say, no, we're going to make sure our children are one-to-one. We're going to provide that district with the resources to be able to do that. And so in terms of, you know, how do we learn from it? I think, one, we have to design what's possible regardless of what our dollars tell us, because if you ask, especially now, somebody is going to answer. I never would have thought we would have raised $15 million. We were trying to get to 10. By the grace of God, we are here. And so I want to encourage everybody to just, you have to think about what's possible, regardless of what barriers are currently in front of you. That's the only thing that's going to work for our children. And when you think about technology, it's the same way. Imagine the impossible. Okay, what are all of the building blocks that we need to get there? And then whether the district is small and affluent, whether it's a large district, there are nuggets that we can pull from all of these places to be able to learn, figure out what works, and act on it quickly.
I love it. Benjamin Mays of Morehouse said, only those of us who can see the invisible can do the impossible.
Yep.
And so seeing that invisible sounds like what you're exhorting us to be thinking about. Poor, underserved children's academic performance is suffering right now, and we have grave concerns about what that will portend for the future. How, in other places, would you recommend that leaders begin to come together and use a collective impact strategy to be able to support the learning of children and the health of families in a comprehensive way?
So I think there are a number of models that we can draw from, and I'm always an advocate of the Strive Network that's always focused on that cradle to career model.
Mhm.
One of the things that has emerged, again, I'm part of this economic recovery task force, and there are a lot of conversations about businesses reopening and the difficulty that they're having getting staff because their children are still at home. And so what I'm pushing now is to say we cannot talk about businesses reopening unless we are talking about the welfare of the children of the employees who are serving in these businesses.
Mhm.
It can't be separate conversations anymore. And so as we think about, we were talking about a website where people could go and look for different jobs. I said, okay, same website, you got to have offerings for transportation. You need to have offerings for childcare services. You need to have connections to digital learning resources. That's how our website is set up with United Way, but it has to start becoming part of our DNA. They can no longer be separate conversations, and it can't be other people's children. It can't be, oh, that's what's happening down in Detroit or up in Pontiac. These are all of our kids, and every business's success, if they haven't figured it out yet, part of why we're here is because the schools are closed. And if they haven't figured out yet that your whole community is built on the strength and the backbone of these school districts, then I don't know what they're paying attention to. And so we've got to come out of this recognizing, like, no, this is the flagship. This is, the safe harbor, as you used to say, DJS, all the time. This is a
Mhm.
safe harbor in our community. We have to
Mhm.
protect it. We have to protect our children. We need to bring our resources in the same way we're talking about recovery and opening and what it's going to look like and feel like. We have to have that same kind of intensity. How are we going to teach our kids? How are we going to make sure they learn? How are we going to make sure their home environments are stable and act with that same level of intentionality? And the roadblocks are there, the pathways there, the tools are there. We just have to act. And so, all the participants who are listening to this, I hope that you're feeling empowered to say, like, I can make a difference, even if it's on my street. I can change the way that we're supporting children, that we're teaching children, that we're talking about education.
That was going to be the final kind of question. That is, you talked about how nobody is worried about taking the credit, but in communities all across the country, even in times of a pandemic, there are people who are
Right.
first wondering what's in it for me before
Yeah.
trying to figure out what's in it for everyone else. So for all of the leaders and community advocates and participants on this call who are not those kinds of people, I wanted you to just share how United Way became the centrifugal force for this collective and collaborative working and services that are taking place, and what we should do in our own communities to step up and be that unifying force for
Mhm.
good and for change.
Sure. I will say it was a deep moment of reflection and just realizing that we have the benefit, we're uniquely positioned, one, that we have access to what is happening with our working families in our community with the report that's called ALICE. It stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. So we had the data that told us already that our community was in trouble. 44% of our region is struggling to meet their most basic needs, and it's 74% in Detroit. So before we even started, we knew we already had this information. We needed to act. Then recognizing that we're an organization that can receive funding as well as an organization that can make grants. And so knowing that our 211 database is connected to 1,300 agencies, that we fund 70 different nonprofits annually through our RFP programs that we have, that we're connected on both sides. We have our corporate partners, we have our philanthropic community, and we have those on the front lines. No one else can bring these two worlds together during this time of crisis the way that we are designed to do it. And so our board they approved $2 million from our emergency stabilization fund. We just benefited from having a board retreat on March 11th, and the executive order came that night, and then we were up and running by March 13th. And I would say if we didn't have it then, we have it now in spades, a culture of courage. We all just sort of
Mm.
looked at each other and said, who's going to do this? We have to do it. And we just locked ourselves in a room for about 3 days. We were on the phone, texting, emailing all types of partners, and just decided we were going to just step out there and do it. And
Who is the we that was locked in the room for 3 days?
Sure. I had my staff members, my key staff members, members from the philanthropic community. We were on the phone texting, because remember, this was right when the social distancing started,
Mm,
so we couldn't, there were a handful of us that were, 6 feet apart in a room, but the rest was really happening by video, by phone, by text message, to figure out how we were going to get this up and running. And we had to just take a leap of faith that others
mm,
would follow, because there was that moment to say, well, I was calling people and saying, are you interested in supporting this fund to help the community right now? And not everybody signed up and said, oh yeah, choose me. It took some convincing, but I would say, deliberate, swift and deliberate action, bringing people to the table to have those conversations, and again, some unusual suspects, and then also charging everyone to be advocates. So it wasn't just United Way saying join this fund. We made sure that the name on the front is more important than the name on the back. So it's called the COVID-19 Community Response Fund. It's housed at United Way, but it is not United Way's fund. And that's been just really a guiding principle as we're thinking about all of this work. But that culture of courage, swift and decisive action, and then that moment of reflection to say, wait a minute, we're designed to do this. People are expecting us to do it. They are counting on United Way. And if, it's in our name, if we can't bring people together at a moment like this, then we shouldn't be in existence. And
mm-hmm,
I'm just thankful, and I want to give a shout out to my staff and all the staff members who are working so hard in these nonprofits right now. We get left out of a lot of conversations around, and I love the healthcare system. My sister's a doctor, but we have a lot of folks in the nonprofit space who are on the front lines too. And
mm,
they made those same types of decisions and had those tough talks, and just are decided to get out there and lead,
mm-hmm.
and blessings to all of them as well.
Exactly. Well, I'd like to close with this. You know, people might be watching this webinar and saying, Darienne Hudson is a force of nature, which you are. Darienne Hudson is eminently well educated and qualified, which you are. I can never be Darienne Driver Hudson. Would you share a word with those on the call who may not have your positional authority, may not have had your vast experience or education, but who are people who care? What message of hope can you give them about the role that they can play in spaces big and small to make a difference during this pandemic?
Mhm. I would say you can never underestimate the power of a single action. It's funny listening to Deborah say, the force of nature, because Deborah also knows that it took me 9 years to get my doctorate from Harvard, that I can be disorganized, that I can be scatterbrained. And, the part of that is that we are all human. We are all uniquely and beautifully made in God's image, and you have to play to your strengths. You have to, for me, it's individualization, it's strategic, it's activator, competition, and focus. And so I draw on those strengths every single day to be able to do the work that I do. You can't let what society says about you and who you are define your destiny.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a
Oh,
Black girl.
preach.
Right. I'm a Black Southern girl. I was 36 when I became superintendent. A lot of people were saying, like, what is this? And you have to show them who you are. You have to show them what's possible. So these titles mean nothing. They really don't. You have to be able to look in the mirror and say, I am Darienne, and regardless of what my position is, it doesn't define me. What defines me is the family that raised me, my faith and belief in what is possible, my commitment to being a lifelong learner, my love, an absolute advocacy for children, and always putting service before self. That's really who I am. And as long as you know who you are, as long as you're in touch with those core values, you could do anything that you want. And it wasn't easy. That's what Deborah's smiling and laughing now. It was not easy. I had a village along the way. There were 45 people at my graduation because all of them had to roll their sleeves up and literally carry me across the finish line. And so, I didn't grow up with money. I didn't have all of these different benefits, but I had a family that really believed in me and nurtured
Mm-hmm.
me. And I've had mentors who believed in me and nurtured me along the way. And so find a mentor, surround yourself with like-minded people, you believe in self-affirmation and convince yourself that you can do it, and just continue, latch on to the Harvard students. Please make an appointment with DJS, sorry, Tall, and talk to her about her experiences, because I knew I could do it because Deborah did it. I knew I could do it because Carolyn did it, because Arlene did it, because Beverly did it. And so I just want to encourage everybody listening, you absolutely, whatever it is that you have in your mind, I know these circumstances are crazy. You're trying to figure out how you're just going to get through the end of the day, but there is tomorrow, and you absolutely have the tools to be anything that you want to be.
And anything that you want to be for the children that we serve.
Amen.
Amen and
Yes.
amen.
Yes.
So, Darienne, I cannot thank you enough on behalf of our dean, Bridget Terry Long, the faculty here, all of the students, and our extended community. We are so proud of you as one of our own. We are so grateful that you are leading this work in your community and modeling for us around the country and around the world what can be done when someone is committed to making the kind of difference you are. Thank you so very much for spending this time with us. It won't be the last time. It will not be the last time. Thank you all for participating in this webinar. We are wishing you success in all of your endeavors as you fight for children and their well-being during the pandemic. We hope that you'll join us in other of these lectures, and we thank you so much. Take good care.
Take good care. Be well.
Stay healthy, stay well, and stay safe.